It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good morning. Scott Luton with Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Now, on this episode, we're going to be talking with a senior leader with a firm that's helping to pilot organizations and their supply chains through these challenging times. Man, talk about challenging times. And we're going to be certainly working really hard to increase your supply chain IQ. So stay tuned for a great episode. A quick programming note before we get started. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. All right, so with no further ado, let's bring in our featured guest, Dr. Ann Robinson, Chief Strategy Officer with Kinaxis. Ann, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning.
You bet. Well, our team has really enjoyed all the prep conversations with you and members of your team, and undoubtedly, we're excited to share your perspective with our audience here today. So are you ready to dive right in?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do it. So up front, as we love to do, before we work, right, get to work, we'll want to really allow our audience the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better, Dr. Ann Robinson a little better. So tell us, where you're from and give us an anecdote or two about your upbringing.
Yeah, absolutely. I am from St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. So if you think about North America, I am from as far east as you can get. It's a beautiful place to visit, so I encourage all your listeners to check it out, certainly when we're able to travel again, but maybe stick to July and August for the weather. A little bit about me. So I grew up with a brother, and he and I were it's very much a musical culture where we're from. So we both grew up playing different instruments. I played classical music as a child. I still have a piano, though it doesn't necessarily get as much attention as it did once upon a time.
So I got to ask, so clearly you play the piano. Any other instruments that would be?
Not so much lately, but I did grow up as a member of the Newfoundland Symphony Youth Orchestra, where I played the clarinet and had my fingers on many other types of instruments, including a few percussion instruments as a child. You will, however, find lots of interesting instruments in my house, including a concertina, some Irish tin whistles, and a myriad of other more traditional instruments that when someone comes over, they always have an opportunity to play.
All right, one last question we love our music here at Supply Chain Now too. Did you and your brother ever have a jam session for the rest of your family?
Yes and no, or he with his friends and me with my friends at various times. I mean, that's pretty dominant part of the culture there, that you jam and sing along and do that as part of almost any time you'd go to a party. That would likely happen regardless of the age and audience.
Love that. Music is definitely one of those things that brings us all together, and we need a lot of that here in 2020. All right, so let's talk about your professional journey a bit, right? Prior to your current role, kind of walk us through that journey, especially a role or two that really helped shape your worldview.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to back it up a little bit, if that's okay, and talk a little bit about my education path, because I was one of those who stayed in school a really long time. I love to tell small children that I was in grade 25 just to watch their eyes pop out of their head. And I started as math as my background, and that was always a passion of mine and something that was very interesting. But growing up in a place like Newfoundland that had been fairly economically repressed when I was, in my formative years, I learned the importance of transferable skills. So I came in with my eye on a career path that would allow me to flex to whatever industry was key at the moment. So during this math degree, I went to Acadia University, a small East Coast Canadian school, and we attended a conference when I was probably 19 years old called "What's a Mathematician Like You Doing in a Place Like This?" And as part of that conference, I got to attend, my friends wanted to be actuaries or math teachers or, sort of the more traditional path you might take as a mathematician. And I attended these other sessions where I was exposed to a field called operations research. And here was a discipline that allowed the application of math and to solve planning problems that could be applied to any industry. And I fell in love right then and there. I came back and said, this is what I want to explore. This is what I want to learn more about. I want to learn the science of it. I want to learn the application of it. And that's what put me on a path of operations research, quickly into applied operations research. And I focused my entire educational path towards that, including transportation logistics and then industrial engineering, all the building blocks that describe our modern day supply chain.
Wow. Well, let me ask you real quick before you continue with the aspects of your journey. What was the first industry that you can recall applying that science and math to?
Yeah, well, so when I went to Waterloo, it was a very applied program, and it was actually applied operations research. And as a result, we had companies that were engaged with us through that entire program. I chose a sort of a more thesis option. Some of my peers chose a co-op option, but because we had companies embedded with the program, we had many opportunities. And one of the first couple I remember, one was with a potato chip manufacturer trying to figure out how to make one of these blends where you have like circles and cheese crunchets and different things all in the same package. And each of those were being manufactured in a different plant. They needed to figure out how to bring them all together and what was the optimal way to do that so you didn't waste and you had the right amount. So potato chips, I guess, in short answer, one that we can all relate to.
Well, and what that illustrates, I think, so well is that all of us as consumers really don't stop to think about everything that goes into in the tech behind a potato chip, the engineering behind a potato chip,
Yes, absolutely. And we had a chance to visit the factory and just even to know between the generic brand and the branded product and how those processes go. It was really interesting.
All right. So I love that. In fact, I'd love to dive in deeper for the next 3 hours into that. That really is a fascinating part that is kind of below the surface level in the industry oftentimes. But let's keep driving forward. What else, when you think of a role or two that really shaped how you view the business world, what else really sticks out?
Sure. So I started my career at Cisco Systems on the West Coast of the United States in California, and through many supply chain roles. I think I started as a supply chain program manager, had no idea what that meant, but within the first 6 months, I was traveling the world helping to educate our supply base about inventory management and just some of the basic principles of inventory optimization. And so that was, I had always intended on being a practitioner, so putting the PhD into practice. And this was a great stepping stone for me to get started. I quickly realized I love the idea of bringing in more people with similar backgrounds to mine in terms of advanced math applied to the science of supply chain, and quickly started to build teams and applied it in the forecasting space, in the inventory management space. And I think one of the things you were curious about were sort of pivotal moments that had an impact on my thought process.
Yes, eureka moments, as we refer to them.
Yeah, well, while I was in one of these more junior roles, and I'm very grateful it happened to me when I was sort of in that senior manager level, I was assigned to be the mentor of someone coming in to lead change management for supply chain. I didn't even know what this was. Certainly I had through my educational background, had not been exposed to it, and certainly didn't want to be hindered by some of the soft stuff. Well, I quickly learned the value and power of the science of change management and how critical it is when you're bringing complex mathematical concepts to a group of executives who you want to trust and believe in what you're trying to do. It's something like the science of how people change and accept change, and the processes to actually get people to adopt these new ideas. that was a huge realization for me. And I am oh so grateful to the woman who brought that to my attention. She's now a very good friend of mine. And just realizing the power of change management and how critical it needs to be as part of our young engineers' toolboxes, so that they can actually bring the latest and greatest ideas to life in their career choice of their career path of choice.
Love that. I worked for a consulting firm where I was one of the few non-engineers, and it was a constant focus as the organization was to try to take all the smarts and the technical expertise that the engineers have conveyed to these business executives about the changes that need to be made. It was a constant focus. But going back, you mentioned basically a strong mentor, it sounded like, in your journey. Before we talk a little more about Kinaxis, share a little bit more about her role in your life.
Yeah, she's, I was actually, and for this particular one, I was actually assigned as the mentor to her coming in. So I had to show her the ropes of supply chain. And as every good mentor-mentee relationship should be, she opened my eyes to the value and power of change management, which I think is really critical. Now, mentors are absolutely key in somebody's life. And if you'll allow me the liberty to talk about sort of the other part of my world, which is engagement with professional society. So one informal, so maybe not paid job that I had, but spent a lot of time in was with the Professional Society Informs, which is, again, I would say another path how I grew up. This isn't the largest association of analytics professionals in the world, and they get together a couple of times a year, as well as a lot of other splinter meetings, all gone virtual now like everybody. But I had the good fortune of getting involved just as I was in graduate school. And then, quite frankly, it stayed with me. And in 2013, I actually was the president of this organization.
Wow.
12,000 strong, mix of practitioners and academics. Many of our supply chain, the thought leaders, the ones who coined the phrases that we all are so familiar with, like bullwhip effect, are all members of this organization. But learning about change management, I actually had the opportunity to apply it to that community as well, as we were continuing to evolve and grow. But by being part of a professional society, I identified people who were in a career path that I would eventually like to have myself. And so they stayed with me, helped me understand how to grow my team, how to understand the balance of the mathematical skill set along with the business skills that would really make for success. And having a mix of people who you can identify as mentors are really great for helping you craft, again, the vision of who you would like to become. And it gives you a great support mechanism as you might navigate through different companies in your career. So I really advocate for people to find that organization that resonates with them, so that they can create that mentor network for themselves and be also a mentor to the next generation.
Love that. And as you said, not only can you individually benefit from that involvement, but how you're giving back to industry, as you put it, informally or volunteer leadership role. I mean, that's where a lot of change comes from. So I appreciate you sharing that. And one other thing before we talk about Kinaxis, you mentioned the bullwhip effect. Just this week, I was reading, as expected for any supply chain practitioner, a few months back here in the States, the meat industry had, was dealt a variety of setbacks, unfortunately. And they, as consumers, we were limited to what we could buy, but 2 packages of meat, at least where we live. And now there is an abundance. It's all on sale because everything's caught up. But, I like to think that we're going to learn so many great lessons in any sector from these months. And so that's part of the silver linings that we believe in here, so that we're come back stronger. And I hate to use such a cliche word, but more resilient, because in a very meaningful and real way. Okay. So now I want to talk more about Kinaxis. We've had a good fortune of meeting and talking with a variety of your team members, and really enjoyed that and learning more about what you do. But for the benefit of our audience, tell us in a nutshell what Kinaxis does, and then we're going to talk about your role and where you spend your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kinaxis is a supply chain software company that focuses on planning and risk mitigation. It's been around since 1984, so we're not new, but still an up-and-comer, I think, in the supply chain planning space. The solution that we bring to the market was purpose-built for supply chain and is 100% in memory, which was what kind of drew my attention to this company and what they were doing, that it was really interesting to see leading-edge analytics married with this unique technology through a technique that we call concurrent planning. So it's been a really fun place to come in, get involved with, and I will say the best company culture of anywhere I've ever worked.
Outstanding. You know, we pick up on that through a lot of these prep conversations, through all of our shows, and that's what we've gathered as well. I got to say, what I really, I'm a simple-minded person. I love things in threes, nice, succinct phrases, and as I shared with you last week, I believe this: no sooner, act faster while removing waste. I love that, and I love how the simplicity of that as it relates to what Kinaxis does.
Yeah, that's great. It really is the core of identifying who we are. So
outstanding. So now let's, everyone, all of us, including myself, we all make assumptions when we see certain titles of where folks spend their time and what they do. As Chief Strategy Officer, what do you do specifically, and where do you spend most of your time?
Sure. Yes. I think this title is different regardless of when you look across different companies and different industries. I'm not sure that anybody has the same actual job description when you peel it back. For me, I have the great fortune of having an excellent day every single day at work because it is so interesting. Truest to my role is the area of strategy management, or really curating with my peers, with trends happening in industry, with all the different spaces, with content like you provide through Supply Chain Now, understanding where is supply chain going, where's our software industry going, and what does the vision for Kinaxis need to look like as we move forward. So that curation of strategy is where we spend a lot of our time, and that's probably 50% of my days right now are focused in that area.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The second part of my team is I have internal or strategic communications and internal change management, which you know how passionate I am about that. So I was thrilled that was part of my purview. And as we go through iterations, small changes or large, we just acquired RubiCloud earlier this year. So going through that integration process, the change management responsibilities lie with my team, and ensuring that transition is as smooth as possible so that we are much better at adopting changes. And then the last area that sort of led to this conversation, and is probably truest to my heart and background, is thought leadership and industry outreach. And this is our opportunity to bring the thought leadership, the expertise of why, what is that vision for Kinaxis to the world through mechanisms like these kinds of podcasts or speaking engagements and others, but also as making sure that as trends, as new innovations are emerging, we're bringing those trends back into our R&D team, our product team, so that they understand what's happening in the outside world. We also have a very strong partnership with academia, and something, again, I very much believe in. If I want to hire strong students into my organization or into our customers, we need to make sure that we're bringing the right sets of insights, problems, things that we're seeing back to academia. So just last night, one of the members of my team and I did a lecture for a university in Texas, sitting right here in our respective homes in Ottawa and in Connecticut, and we're able to meet with 60 students across various levels of supply chain, knowledge from undergrad to grad students, and share a story, which is just an amazing opportunity particularly during the pandemic.
Outstanding. So, quick follow-up question. A lot of the space where we've spent a bunch of volunteer time here in the last 5 or 6 years has been on the awareness side of supply chain, right? Going into schools and we had this program called Supply Chain 101 where we're talking with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders just about what goes into supply chain. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how smart these kids are, how quickly they pick it up, and then they start making connections. It's fascinating. We look forward to doing it again soon. But speak for a minute with your interactions with academia and with students. Do you believe that there is more of an awareness and an appeal for students to get into different aspects of global supply chain?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we were going to talk about this a little bit, so I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But you can't turn on the TV these days, the news, and not hear some mention of supply chain, challenges in supply chain, opportunities in supply chain. You just mentioned the meat industry having a shortage and now a glut of product availability. Guess what? That's all supply chain and supply chain science. Absolutely, as businesses have evolved, as customer interests have become more specified or more, critical given what's happening in the world right now, the attention and importance of supply chain has never been higher. And I think it's a great time. But you don't just have to find the title supply chain in an academic program. Industrial engineering, operations management, production, any of those flavors, quite frankly, even operations research is a really great backdrop to step into a career in supply chain.
That is an excellent point. Analytics, technology, you name it, all of it funnels into, in one way, shape, or form, into global supply chain. Excellent point. Okay, so you prefaced what the kind of next segment of the conversation, which I'm really looking forward to diving into based on our pre-show conversations. So when you step back and kind of survey global supply chain, what are some of the trends or topics that you're tracking more than others right now?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we've been seeing lately is this increased attention, maybe scrutiny on the supply chain, and that senior leaders are realizing how critically important supply chain and supply chain performance are to their company performance. So we're seeing really every executive and every CEO pretty much say, okay, I need to become a supply chain manager. I need to understand what's happening here. And where the trend historically in supply chain, us supply chain professionals are used to being a cost center. So it's been efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. But right now we're seeing the conversations I'm having are suggesting that resiliency will trump efficiency. And I know you said it's a little bit of cliche, maybe it is, but this notion of being able to weather the storm, whether that means you need to dual source components, maybe not just the critical ones, but the second most critical ones, or you're going to do dual production by having product closer to your end customers. This notion that a resilient supply chain is the more important metric is really surfacing. And that, of course, to make those types of investments, to make those types of decisions is really bubbling up to the C-suite of major companies.
Love that. And one final note to that, and organizations and their leadership, they can't afford to wait, right?
Absolutely. So when people are looking to do this and you say, okay, well, what does that mean? What am I going to do differently? This is a great opportunity to say, look, let's not just try and force fit this new way of thinking into our existing supply chain model. This is a chance for us to look at revamping it. Let's look at how to redesign our supply chain so we can be more resilient. This is the time to tackle that digital transformation so you can have that resilience and still be in a cost-effective manner. And that's where we help many customers just have that conversation to understand what their supply chain could look like and how it could operate differently by going through this digital transformation. I really believe that you cannot afford to wait. We're seeing that the only constant right now is change. There's another good cliche for you. But we don't know what's going to happen next. In where I live, we're seeing the pandemic cases uptick again. So we're seeing things slow down again between the unprecedented number of storms and hurricanes that are hitting to the wildfires. Resilience needs to be key.
Yes. And of course, supply chain doesn't just own this notion of resiliency. It applies to so many different things. And, as we both know, things become cliche for a reason because they're so very real for so many people. So, all right. So you're setting the stage. very nicely, I think, for this second big topic that really is front and center for you here lately, right?
That's right. So it's great that we have these now sort of more digitally robust supply chains. We are leveraging techniques like artificial intelligence and machine learning to empower the sort of mundane supply chain tasks, or to really look at the supply chain differently. Now let's talk a little bit about the supply chain practitioner role itself. This wasn't always seen as a sexy role, believe it or not, Scott. This was not the one that everybody said, I want to do that. But these days, it's really emerging into needing somebody with a much broader skill set and a much broader understanding. Gartner has been popularizing this notion of a citizen data scientist. So somebody who understands the models, understands their use in practice. I would take that one step further in the supply chain space and say the supply chain citizen data scientist is the type of person that we want to see sitting as a supply chain practitioner. So it's somebody who understands the science of supply chain very well. They don't need to build the models. We've got really smart technologies that have the models for us, but they understand how those models work. But at the same time, they understand the dynamics of the business that they're planning. So whether or not let's assume it's a product company, you understand what your product is, who the suppliers are. You have a relationship with marketing that tells you what the marketing expectations are. You have a sight to the demand that you can understand what those demand plans are. You really have to have that business understanding for that product. Well, guess what? That also requires really strong communication skills, influence skills, change management skills, because ultimately, particularly as our world has become faster and faster, the realization that the supply chain is absolutely the last touch point of your product before it arrives in the customer's hands, being the keeper of that final touch point before that moment of truth is critical to the success of the company.
Love
and
it.
Such a great role to be in. I love seeing students' eyes get bigger and bigger as we talk to them about the opportunity, but just the importance of those roles.
Gosh, there's so much there that I love what you just shared, especially the keeper of the last touch. That just brings, there's a monument in Wichita, Kansas called Keeper of the Plains. And it's a famous image sculpture. And so I can picture a keeper of the last touch with maybe a supply chain monument of sorts. Such a great visual. The other thing, a couple of things you touched on there. Number one is the integrated, holistic approach. Let's break down the silos. Let's get different functional areas talking and working and planning together. There's a very large global food manufacturer that just released some news about creating an operations center, which isn't creatively named, but the approach bringing all this, including R&D and marketing, under this tent, and how they're going to save $2 billion a year in the next 5 years because of that. And then the last thing that you touched on as it relates to the appeal of supply chain as a profession, and again, going back to silver linings that we are really excited about in these challenging times, is the people that make it happen across global supply chain. Not only are they being more recognized, or at least they're more, the consumers are more mindful, but what I think is even more needed is organizations, because we had to keep global supply chains running. There was a lot more emphasis on protecting and making sure their health and welfare are provided for. And that, I hope, will be permanent. So we'll see that it's our charge. We need to make sure that it stays permanent. So much great stuff you just shared there, Ann. Okay, so let's talk about one of the final things that is really front and center related to people, frankly. What else are you tracking here lately?
And just to continue on the same theme, I guess, is as we see these roles emerge in supply chain, we need to think about our supply chain practitioner a little bit differently. And the historical kind of command and control, or a traditional management model, doesn't really work anymore. You really need to be a player coach type of perspective. And if you think about that, what is fundamentally at the core of that? Yes, you want to create the guidelines. Yes, you want to create the space, but it's about empowering people. You want to empower that supply chain professional to be able to understand the dynamics, understand where it's headed, and really have that importance. Because if they have that responsibility, first of all, it's a heck of a lot more of an attractive role to all our millennials who are coming out right now.
Excellent point.
And you're going to get a better work product because that person's going to take that personal responsibility for the success of their plan. So the recognition in companies that I think are going to succeed are ones really where we emphasize that people matter. Being able to have the conversations, creating the safe space for challenging discussions, empowering autonomous decision-making. I think these are the ones where it really resonates with my personal leadership style, that I want people to own their successes and also own their failures, quite frankly, because there's nothing you can learn more than when a challenging moment goes awry. It teaches you so much. Now, that's not saying repeat it over and over again. We certainly value success, but let's learn from our mistakes and let's empower people to drive value, because that's really what also leads to a very inspiring and satisfying career. And ultimately, we want people to see supply chain as a destination for their careers.
Love that. And you've already shared how you embodied that earlier in this interview, where you are completely open and relish what you learned kind of in that reverse mentoring channel. And I would argue that part of successful empowerment of people is senior leaders being willing to learn, coming back the other way, and acknowledging that they don't have all the answers, and they can learn from folks that are newer to problems, newer to topics, newer to challenges. So I love that, Ann. All right. So before we move on to, maybe one last thought you've got that you're tracking across the global business world. There's so much to dive into. It's tough to keep these conversations as short as they are. Anything else you'd like to add on those really three big points you made before we tackle another one?
I think that probably covers it. I just feel grateful to be in an environment where I'm able to actually explore these, and very much with a leadership peer group that embodies these beliefs as well.
To have a culture that really allows you. I love that. That's that is so needed here in all years, but especially a year like 2020. Okay, so going a little bit broader, kind of beyond just global supply chain. While you and I are kindred spirits, that is there anything else? Maybe, I don't know. We love it so much; it touches so much. But any broader topic that you're really paying a lot of attention to?
Yeah, these days I think there's a lot of conversations right now around diversity and inclusion, and we're having conversations, and I'm thrilled to hear the healthy dialogue that is coming out. And as we talk about sort of whether it's in the supply chain space or really in the modeling type of space, there's also a lot of conversation about bias in data, and I think that one is a very well discussed topic. I recently had the opportunity, though, to take that conversation a little bit further with some experts in the space of diversity and inclusion when it comes to modeling, and actually talking about model design, and maybe it's supply chain model design. And are we introducing bias through the model design itself? And how do you mitigate against bias? And I don't have the answers. I think it's really an interesting topic. I think it's one that's going to come to the surface more predominantly over the coming months. And as we think about how do we ensure that we're not just replicating a solution to a problem we're thinking of from our own reflection.
Yeah,
and
with our continued reliance and amplification of using technology across in new ways never before seen, I think that is such a great topic to bring up and be mindful of, because like you, I certainly don't have all the answers. I am far from a technologist, but we all use the technology, right? And being human, our brains go to certain things when you may think of dress shoes, or our brain goes certain things when you think of certain roles. We've got to make sure, what I'm hearing is that the AI and the algorithms behind those things that power today's technology don't have those same assumptions, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Some good stuff there. I like, for as much of a technical side of your brain you have, I love how you bring things down to my level, because layman's terms are a good thing here for me. So thanks so much for making it easy to follow. Okay, so let's talk about how folks can connect with you and Kinaxis. I know y'all got a big event. You keep a steady keynote calendar in these virtual times, but I think y'all got a big event coming up in the end of October, right?
We do, that's right. So our Connections event, and I'll let you help people see how to spell that, because it's a little unique. Connections, if they go to connections.com, you'll see the agenda, you'll see all of the speaking slots and who's speaking there. The executive and strategy track is from my team, but there's many other fantastic keynotes. So I would love to see some of your listeners come in and meet up with us there for sure.
Outstanding. And we're going to add that link to the show notes and make it really easy for folks to click and get involved in that. What else would you suggest, how folks connecting with you and learning more about Kinaxis?
Certainly. People can reach out with me on LinkedIn. That is the number one way that I've been connecting with people these days. You can certainly reach out, and if not to talk to me or to one of my peers, that's the best angle. We also have a blog at Kinaxis where it shares a mix of thought leadership, product details, and other things, called The Signal, on our Kinaxis.com website. And I would certainly point people there as well to learn more about not only what we're bringing to the table, but also about our philosophies and thoughts. I would be remiss if I wouldn't mention we are also active on Instagram, and you'll see a little bit more about Kinaxis life there. So that culture piece really shines through our Instagram account.
Love that. Hashtag Kinaxis life is a thing, right?
Yes.
Well, such a great conversation. We look forward to having you back. I really appreciate the cultural piece that you've talked through here today, with a big emphasis on people and empowering people. I love your thoughts on the supply chain profession, and it's really encouraging to hear some of what you're seeing, the current next generations, their view of the global supply chain profession. So all really good news. And let's face it, we all need as much good news as we can get these days, right?
Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Yes. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. And to our audience, hopefully you've enjoyed it as much as we have. We've been chatting with Dr. Ann Robinson, Chief Strategy Officer with Kinaxis. If you enjoyed this interview, you can check out a wide variety of other interviews at supplychainnowradio.com. On behalf of our entire team here, hey, thanks for joining us, but do good, give forward, and be the change that's needed. And with that said, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.